Good morning and welcome to the David and David on Real Estate podcast. Today we are in episode number 165. Welcome back, David Corman. It's so good to be here again with you.
Nice number. Always good to be with you. And we got an interesting topic that I know that you're excited to discuss today.
Yes, very interesting topic. Today we're going to be talking about self-represented clients. And David, I chose this podcast topic because I think this is a concept that's really misunderstood by the industry. And I think it's so misunderstood that I think we need to devote a whole podcast episode to it because I think we're going to shed some light. And I think many of you listening will be quite surprised with, some of the things that we discussed today.
Yeah, and my initial reaction whenever this topic comes up and about self-representation, my initial, don't do it. Don't do it. I'm a big supporter of real estate agents, and not just because, we work hand in hand, but every time I sit down and analyze, is someone better off doing it on their own or having an agent? You do the pros and the cons, and I've written blogs on it, and I've done seminars on, and it always comes down to the same thing. Like, I always think you're better represented than self-represented for a number of factors. But, there is an opportunity. People can be self-represented. And I think it's an important discussion to have. If you're going to do it, here's how to do it. Here's why you do it, and best practices, etc. Right? And so I know this is something you have to talk to your agents about all the time and make sure that because there's obligations when you're on the other side of a transaction now with somebody who's a sufferer, that you have an obligation to deal with them in a certain way.
Yeah, and we'll get into the nuances, but David, the overarching message here, and I think you share in this sentiment is that your reputation is the most important thing you have in business. And you got to safeguard that with everything you have. And it's easy to say, you know what, I'm going to represent you and take both parts of the commission, but at what cost? At what cost today to affect your reputation tomorrow? And I think that's the biggest thing that we really want to push here is that to do your job effectively, as any professional, because I don't think a lawyer can represent, two sides of a situation. And I think it's extremely difficult to do your job properly as a realtor representing both sides. And in fact, Tressa has specifically said that you cannot represent multiple clients when you own the property that's listed for sale. So that's a big difference. A lot of realtors own real estate properties, own investment properties. If you list your own house for sale, you cannot represent both sides on your own property. Tressa has ruled that it's a conflict of interest. Rico's put up a bulletin about this. So, that's something that we see quite a bit in our industry where realtors try to represent both themselves essentially and a buyer client on their own property. And Rico has come and said, no, 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 you can't do that. There's no way that you can effectively, represent that other client if you're the owner of the property. So some big changes coming up.
Yeah, and some of the analysis, like you've touched on already, David, it's risk versus reward. Okay, so even in certain circumstances where you're allowed to act on both sides, provided you do A, B, C, D, E, and and you disclose and blah, 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 the decision sometimes like, is that a good idea to do it? And we face that decision in our business too, because there are certain circumstances where the law society allows us to act for more than one party. There's some where you can't, but there's certain services where you can act more than one party. So we go through this in our office too, because clients are always saying, "Can you just act for both? It'll be less expensive for us, but we'll save a little bit on legal fees, and everybody's friendly and everybody knows each other, and and so we look at the rules and the fact situation, and sometimes we say, well, we can legally, we can technically, we can, and here's how we do it. We have to do A, B, C, and D in order to be able to do it. But then beyond that analysis, something is still, but why should we? Like, because there's a risk to us. If things go bad, there's a risk to us. And And it also won't work out good for the clients if things go bad, because eventually they're going to have to, if things go bad, they're going to have to get separate representation, and everybody's going to look to blame us because we're the common denominator. We were acting for even a moment in time for both sides. So now we put ourselves in the middle of a transaction where everybody can point a finger at us and say, you should have known better. You should have known that there was a potential conflict here, and you started to act on both sides and things didn't go well. So let's have everybody blame the law firm. So our decision sometimes is, well, even though we can, sometimes we just choose not to. It just doesn't make sense for us to do it. And to try and save our client $300 or $500 by going to get independent legal representation from somebody else is a much better decision than for us to take that risk on. Okay, so, and the same thing in your business, even though sometimes a realtor can act on both sides of a transaction as long as they comply with RICO, should they do it? Right. And I'm always thinking, like, it's not worth chasing that commission sometimes for the potential risk of that particular transaction going bad. And that's bad enough. But then the point that you make so well is, how is that going to affect your reputation? Because word does get out when things go bad.
100%. And I think as a realtor or as any business, you have to have that 25-year lens. What is my reputation going to be perceived in the marketplace, 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now? And I feel like sometimes for realtors, it's really hard to have the long-term perspective. They look at, what's happening in my life today? Where is my next client coming from? What am I working on tomorrow? Right? And it's a very short perspective because of the nature of our business, where if you have a full day planned, one phone call in the morning can change your whole entire day around. So realtors are used to, living, pretty chaotic lives, and it's not easy, right? There's certain challenges that come with, being attached to your phone and having to, drop what you're doing to service clients. It's a difficult situation, but I think, I would encourage every realtor listening that you have to safeguard your reputation, have the long-term approach to what your reputation is going to be. And it's really hard to do that effectively if you're representing both sides of the transaction today.
Yeah, and when we look at it today, we're in the spring 2025 and we're in a downturn in the market, right? And you got realtors out there saying, I don't have any commissions yet this year. I'm on, like, you start feeling the pressure and the stress. Same thing at our end, for a law firm, our volumes are down, but there aren't as many transactions. So that puts pressure on you when you have these opportunities to perhaps act on both sides of a transaction to say, yeah, you know what, we need the commission or we need the legal fees, so let's take the risk and jump in it. When we're in a real busy market, and a realtor's faced with the decision of, do I want to be on both sides? It's a way easier decision to say, no, I'll take a pass. I'll just do one side of this because I'm really busy anyways. And why should I got enough coming in, enough commission coming in, enough action going on. I don't have to take that risk. And the same thing at our end. No, we're busy. We don't have to take on that file and expose ourselves to any risk. Let's just do half of the transaction. Let somebody else do it. And therefore we're not exposed, and we're busy anyways. We got a lot of other stuff. So that's the danger in the market that we're in right now, David. Like, it becomes too tempting to take on those risks.
I'm glad you brought that point forward, David, because it certainly is an abundance mindset versus a scarcity mindset, right?
Absolutely.
If you're doing all the right things in your business, if you're prospective and you're working hard, if you have leads coming in, then you're probably not going to be taking on that risk because you don't have to. You know that there's other deal flow coming your way. But if what you're one of the 76% of the agents on the Toronto Regional Real Estate Board that hasn't done a deal yet this year, you're going to be tempted to grab both sides of that coin and make some pretty bad decisions along the way that are going to have an impact on your reputation.
Yeah, and that's the danger. And that's where, your agents are lucky to be part of your brokerage, because when they get in those situations, they can come and talk to you. They can come talk to Sabia, and sometimes you can talk them out of it. And if you can't talk them out of it, then you say, okay, if you're going to do it, Here's how you do it to
Right.
protect yourself, right? And that's the other side of the coin. If you're going to do it, make sure you're very careful and you're doing it properly and you're complying with Rico and Tressa and how you're going to do it.
Yeah. And David, on that topic, I'm really a fan of the RICO guide. It's mandatory with Tressa, and it does a really good job. If you really use the RICO guide effectively, it actually really helps you do your job. Because if you come across to a party that is self-represented, and by the way, Tressa has removed the word client. So there's no longer a client relationship that exists. You're either represented or you're self-represented. And if you're self-represented, there's no services that the realtor can give to you. You can't write an offer. You can't give any advice. If a self-represented client says, "Hey, what did that house sell for?" You can't answer that question. If the self-represented party says, "Hey, which listings should I use to base my price that I want to put on offer on this property?" And you say, "Well, you might want to look at this, this, and this," that's you using your expertise and knowledge to convey information to the other party, and you're actually breaching RICO rules and crossing that threshold of you're now representing this client. So you got to be very careful as a professional, first and foremost, to understand what limitations you have and what responsibilities you have of how to deal with self-represented parties. And the other thing is that you're not allowed to prepare an offer for self-represented parties. So if somebody says to you, "Hey, I want to be self-represented," and you show them the RICO guide, you go through the RICO guide. The RICO guide does a really good job of pointing out all the pitfalls and why you shouldn't be self-represented. After reading the RICO guide, if that client still wants to be self-represented, you cannot prepare the offer on their behalf. So how does so agents ask me, "So okay, David, how do I get an offer from that person?" Well, that person has to go speak to their lawyer or to a third party company that specializes in preparing offers. And they have to go and do that process on their own and then come back to you with a signed offer on the property. That's the proper way of dealing with self-represented parties. You cannot give them any advice. You cannot tell them which comparables to look. You cannot advise them on price. And you have to be extremely careful how you answer questions about the property that you are representing.
Yeah, and we get asked to prepare agreements of purchase sale all the time. People want to sell privately, or they want to put up even on the buyer side. Usually, it's the buyer side that's putting the offer together. So we do it, but before we do it, we always have that conversation. Like, why are you doing this without a realtor? Like, we can prepare an offer based on all the information that you as the buyer give to us. Okay. But we can't give advice as lawyers about market conditions or what their purchase price really should be or how much deposit should be paid to it or what might be acceptable and things like that. Like, we don't know the market, as much as sometimes we think we know them, we don't know the market. We certainly don't know it in any particular neighborhood. We can't give them any advice on comparables. We can't give them any business advice. So it's like, okay, we can prepare an offer. You give us all the information. Who's the buyer, who's the seller, how much deposit do you want to put in, what purchase price do you want, what closing date do you want, what conditions do you want. We can find a legal description, but we can't give them the advice that a realtor would give them at all. And so our discussion is always like, why are you doing this without, like, where how are you basing your offer and putting it in? Like, why are you coming with this purchase? We can't help you out with that, right? And sometimes the answer is, well, I was talking to the seller's agent and they told me that this and this. Okay, well, that raises a whole other thing. Is the seller's agent giving you too much information? They're not, you're self-represented. They're not supposed to be saying those things to you, and you certainly can't rely on it.
David, and I always give clients the analogy that, say you're getting sued by somebody. Somebody serves you a legal notice and you're being taken to court and they have a lawyer representing them. That's like the person who's being served going to that lawyer saying, can you defend me in this motion?"
Right,
Like that's the same thing you're doing. The
right.
listing agent has a relationship with the seller. There's a relationship there. And the seller has entrusted the listing agent to get them the best possible offer on their property. That's their job. And if you come to them off the streets, do you think they're going to be loyal to you as a buyer that came out of nowhere? Of course not. They're going to keep their loyalty to the seller, right? And try to work in the seller's best interest. They have a relationship there. They know each other. There's a level of trust and commitment there.
They have to keep their loyalty to the seller. That's who they're representing. They have a contractual obligation to that seller because that seller retained them and signed a representation agreement. So
1000%.
you can't, we get it all the time. Oh, I met the seller. There's such a nice person who's helping me out, and they gave me some tips and told me what to do to put the offer together. And they told me this property sold for this and that. So I'm in the ballpark, and that the seller would probably accept it if we come in this range. Like all of that should be discounted because first of all, that agent shouldn't be saying that, and
100%.
secondly, the buyer's got to discount all of that, not listen to it, right? Because they shouldn't be telling that. I mean, you don't know if any of that is true. They're not acting on behalf of that buyer. They have a clear fiduciary obligation, contractual legal obligation to the seller. So it's a dangerous situation. So that's why I always, my answer is always the same. Don't I want to be self-represented? No, like don't. Like why?
Yeah, and the last thing I'll lead with, David, is that, if you do meet a party that wants to be self-represented, um, and you establish a relationship with them, there is a possibility that you can convert them to a represented party with a limited scope of service. So this is where you would use your schedule to the buyer representation agreement, where you would clearly define a limited scope of service. So you can say something like, this relationship is only for me to prepare an offer and advise on comparables for this property, and that's the only service that I'm providing you. And the buyer, signs off on that. It's clear, it's in writing, everybody understands. And now the party is no longer self-represented. They're represented by you, but they're represented in a limited capacity that's, clearly laid out on paper. And that's something that, as long as it's properly documented, as long as it's properly presented, as long as it's in writing, that is acceptable. And we do see that happening quite a bit. But that would be the right way of representing somebody in a limited capacity, and helping facilitate the transaction forward, representing the seller.
Yeah, and that's the only way you can legally try to do it. But I think an argument, because let's say you do that, okay, and things go bad, that party is going to come back and say, I didn't understand what I signed.
Yep.
David didn't explain to me exactly what this limited representation means. He just told me I can help you as long as you sign here. I didn't really understand it. English isn't my first language. I didn't really, it's like they come up with a million excuses. When things go bad, even if you did all the documents correct and you follow the procedure, you're still open to a challenge and an argument that he never explained it. I didn't notice he just said sign here, sign here. I didn't really understand it and everything. So, and we get that in our business too. Okay. We go through a process in every transaction to explain the documents that are being signed to close the transaction. And sometimes, we've had, when things go bad, clients will say, oh, the lawyer didn't explain what that document meant. I didn't understand what I was signing. I didn't understand that I had, two options here and I chose one option. I didn't know, he just told me sign here, sign here. So that's why I'm really happy in our business now, in our firm, every time we sign documents with people, we have a video recording and an audio recording. Here's the document. It's all recorded, what the explanation was, so that eliminates that. So it's hard in your business to, every time you have a meeting with someone, do you want to just set up cameras and do a video recording and have it all recorded? But if you think about it, that's the only way you can really protect yourself, because even if you do everything by the book, okay, when things go bad, everybody's looking for someone to blame. So they're going to blame you. So again, even though you're doing it all by the book, you're still taking a risk. So if you're going to do it, not only do you get them to sign that document, make sure you explain it to them and make sure you give them opportunities to question it. And if you have another witness there, that always helps too. But make sure you do actually give them the explanation of what that document means. And don't just say to someone here, just sign here, and I can help you with your offer.
Yeah, David, I give your office a lot of credit because you guys have been doing the electronic signing through COVID, and I know you guys record all those conversations. And look, there's a lot happening. There's people are being pulled in different directions. They're packing, they're finalizing their mortgage commitment. There's a lot being thrown at them. So they can forget details that you've explained to them, and then after closing, they're like, oh, what's this? I didn't sign this guarantee or whatever. And sometimes it's a great way just to refresh their memory, right? But I think it protects everybody involved, and it's a really good practice, and that's one of the benefits of dealing with a world-class firm like Cormans LLP.
Well, thanks for saying that. We try and move on, and technology always improves, and here it's a real convenience for our clients, so it's great for that reason. But the other benefit, and it wasn't what we were looking for when we went into it, but it turns out it's great protection for us as lawyers, because everything that's said in those meetings is recorded, audio recording, video recording.
Yep.
And before documents signed, they have the opportunity to ask questions, and questions are answered. So there's no more disputes about what happens in that. So I think that's good for everybody.
1000%.
So
David, what a great conversation.
yeah,
I think it's a very hot topic button for the industry. I think a lot of people misunderstand what it really means to be self-represented, and I hope that we answered a lot of questions and shed light on a really important topic that I think there needs to be more conversation around.
yeah. If you're gonna do it, make sure you go to your broker. Let them either talk you out of it or make sure that you do it properly.
Yeah, and never be afraid to seek the guidance of a law firm, of somebody that you use regularly or somebody that's going to be involved in closing the transaction. And David Corman, I know you guys are, always readily available there to answer any questions. So, make sure you follow the rules, follow the law. It's going to help you go through these situations. Remember, you have fiduciary duties to your clients. You have to act in their best interest, and those are the highest form of agency law out there. So you have to take it seriously. You're an extension of your client in a lot of respects, and you have to act in their best interest every step of the way. And when you're representing two clients at the same time, you can't have proper fiduciary duties to both.
Yeah, and remember David Gorski's advice, you got to look big picture, long term. It's easy to chase the immediate commission in front of you, but your reputation is more important, because you're not going to be in this business for 6 months or a year. You want to be in this business for 25 years, and you don't want to do anything that can damage your reputation. So try and always think that you're in an abundance market. Always look at the big picture and do the right thing.
David Corman, always a pleasure, guys. Thank you so much for joining us. Join us next time on the David and David on Real Estate podcast.